1917, the Russian capital, Petrograd. A small group of soldiers, sailors, and factory workers storm the Winter Palace. Shown here, later restaged for the cameras, the event became a symbol of the Russian Revolution, the end of the old order. But what for some was seen as an explosion of hope, for others was a catastrophe.
A great country has been taken over by crime and lawlessness, outrages forced on a defenseless people, all honor, all duty stifled, everything noble destroyed.
Prince Felix Yusupov was one of those many aristocrats forced to flee Russia after the revolution. To the Bolsheviks who'd taken over, these people were the enemy. Rich landowners who'd lived, they thought, for too long off the fat of peasants and workers. Those that failed to escape were killed in their thousands. Amongst them, the Tsar, Emperor of Russia, and his family, shot in a cellar in Ekaterinburg in August 1918. Later, in exile in Paris, Yusupov wrote his version of the events that led to the Tsar's fall. This program reconstructs that account. Central to Yusupov's version of the story are the Tsar and Tsarina themselves, Nicholas and Alexandra. At his coronation in 1886, Nicholas had put the crown on his own head, no one else being worthy to do so. He'd inherited an empire covering 1/6 of the world, 125 million people, over whom his word was law. As a child, Felix used to play at Tsarskaya Selo, the Tsar's summer palace.
I remember, from my earliest days, thinking of them as a people apart, different from everyone else, and beyond criticism, like beings of a higher order. If anyone said the merest thing against them, it shocked me, and I'd flush with anger.
The Romanov family had ruled Russia for 300 years, and few had questioned their right to do so. The church taught the peasants to call the Tsar their little father. This was a backward, traditional, superstitious country. But the trouble with autocracy, the absolute rule of one man, is that it puts great pressure on that one man to deliver. And even Yusupov admits Nicholas had his failings.
He was weak, to put it bluntly. He worked hard and with great determination, but he was shy, only really comfortable in military circles. He never really got to know his country, and his country didn't know him.
In 1916, 1 year before the revolution, Yusupov was training as an officer cadet in the Tsarist army. A prince of Imperial Russia, his family was amongst the richest of the ruling elite. Their palace in Petrograd, the Moika, was just one of 35 palaces they owned across the empire. Felix himself was something of an eccentric, a poseur. All his life he'd loved dressing up in outrageous costumes. But by 1916, married to the Tsar's niece Irina, he'd vowed to put his riotous youth behind him. Because to him it seemed already obvious some catastrophe was hanging over Russia. The bond between ruler and ruled slipping away. 200 miles to the west, the First World War was just into its third year. Already millions were dead or wounded. But just as damaging as the German guns were the stories doing the rounds of incompetent generals, of treason in high places. Morale, like the army itself, was being shot to pieces.
It's not surprising. Riposte. We send them over the top without rifles. Coupe. We say, when he falls, pick up the rifle of the man in front. Or we give them rifles, but no ammunition.
So what are they saying?
They just want to be sure everything possible's been done for them. But there are rumors. I don't like to say it, Felix. I know how it hurts you when you hear ill of His Majesty.
Yusupov was used to unquestioned respect being shown the ruling classes. Instead, it seemed they were becoming a laughingstock. People said they were out of touch, more interested in themselves than in the common soldiers fighting at the front. Even the German-born Tsarina was accused. People whispered she had divided loyalties, or worse, that she was a German spy. There was no truth to the rumors, but such disrespectful gossip hurt Yusupov deeply. He agonized as to why the people's trust in the ruling elite was ebbing away. And he found a scapegoat, someone to blame, in a peasant faith healer called Grigory Efimovich Rasputin. So who was this Rasputin? He's been immortalized since in countless B-movies as a power-hungry wizard who controlled the Tsarina with some magic or sexual spell. As history, it's mostly nonsense. But Yusupov came to believe it was Rasputin, no one else, who brought down the old order. It makes his story at least worth closer examination.
This peasant, this moujik, in his greasy boots, entering the palace, traipsing about on the imperial marble. With those greasy boots, he trampled on the people's ancient faith in the purity and justice of the Tsar.
The private tragedy of the Romanov family was the sickness of their only son, Alexis, with a disease of the blood. Doctors feared he'd never live to inherit the throne. Partly in desperation, partly because she too was superstitious, Alexandra had turned to Rasputin to help the boy. Known since as a mad monk, he was in fact neither. Just a wandering holy man with some unexplained skill that seemed to pull Alexis back from the brink. He'd become a frequent visitor to the royal nursery. But with Alexandra, he was on his best behavior. What others saw was his wilder side.
Listen to this. Rasputin came home drunk at 5 a.m. Maria Gilles, wife of a captain in the Hussars, slept over at Rasputin's. During the visit of the Pitolkor family, Rasputin took a prostitute on his knee and whispered in her ear.
Where did you get them?
The policeman on guard at his flat kept notes. He sold them on the black market. This man sidled up to me outside. He said these would tickle my palate. He said there are photographs too. Orgies. Aristocratic ladies involved.
He was turning them into a laughingstock, the Tsar and Tsarina. That they should let such an immoral man twist them round his finger. The Tsar was at the front. She'd sent him these messages full of Rasputin's orders. People began to say, he rules Russia through her. There'd been some business of a letter she'd written talking of her love for him, for Rasputin. Quite innocent. But the letter was stolen. People said she's having an affair. Soldiers are dying in their thousands, and she's having an affair.
Rasputin's importance lies not in what he did, but in what people said he did. The affair with Alexandra was lies. Equally, it's debatable how great his influence really was. But ordinary Russians heard how he could make and unmake ministers. It seemed to explain the recent muddle. 5 interior ministers in just 10 months. 3 different ministers for war. People said, is this stupidity or is this treason? Yusupov resolved to stop the rot. He went to bribe or frighten Rasputin to leave the court, but it was no use.
He didn't need money. He gave away most of what he had, and he seemed immune to any threat. I'd arranged my meeting through an old friend, Marie Golovine, one of those ladies of the court now obsessed with this fake. I said to her, if you love him, you must urge him to leave. He is in danger. He is in danger. She said,
he has no reason to fear.
Someone will kill him, sooner or later.
No, God would not allow it.
Go into the other room. I want to talk to him alone.
As for Rasputin, he was even more sure of himself than she was. Puffed up with this intolerable arrogance.
Sit. You shouldn't be afraid of me, you know. When you come to know me better, you'll see what kind of man I am. I can do anything. And if the Tsarina obeys me, well, surely you can. I'll be seeing her soon. I'll tell her you've been to see me. It'll please her. Maybe make you a minister. Would that amuse you?
You think you can? Make me a minister?
Oh, it's a simple thing. The Empress is very wise. With her, I can do anything. As for him, Nicky, well, he's a child of God. He ought just to play with the children or potter in the vegetable garden, not rule the country. That's a little difficult. And so we help him, with God's blessing.
I can tell you, it almost made me physically sick to hear how this peasant horse thief spoke of the Emperor of Russia. To think this man stood so close to the throne at a time of such need. It seemed to me I had no option but to take extreme measures to deliver Russia from this evil man.
Was Yusupov right to blame Rasputin for all Russia's problems? Or had he ignored more deep-rooted issues pulling Russia apart? Beyond the Moika, there had existed for centuries a gulf between rich and poor. Yusupov, with his private train, his theater, his oil fields, lived a life a world removed from the peasants that worked his estates. 50 years before, these mujiks had been serfs, objects he could have bought or sold, living only to work his land. Now serfdom was abolished, but still these people had little. They scratched the soil with wooden plows, grew rye and oats, lived on a diet of cabbage soup. In the cities, Russia's backwardness was just as obvious. Unlike in Western Europe, where 100 years of industrial growth had created a reasonably settled workforce, here industry was new and primitive. Unions were banned. There was no right to strike. No legal means to improve the atrocious conditions. As a young man, Yusupov had visited the slums of the imperial capital. There, he wrote,
"All around us the dregs of humanity lay half naked, drunk and filthy. They quarrelled, swore, vomited. The smell was beyond description.
There were those that called for change. First, the middle class, keen for a voice. They'd been given a parliament, the Duma, in 1906, but it had little real power. Second, more frightening to the old order, a new breed of professional revolutionaries had emerged, struggling to politicize the peasants and workers. But for Tsar Nicholas, change was out of the question. And so long as the army and state police obeyed him, protests would be met with savage efficiency. His opponents, if caught, faced death or hard labor. This, then, was the brutal reality Yusupov chose to ignore. It was not just respect that had propped up the old order, but force. And without the loyalty of his troops, the Tsar was nothing. Three years of war with Germany had tested that loyalty to the limits.
It began so well. A brilliant advance pushing into East Prussia. But we were fighting the best equipped army in the world. Our troops were underfed, badly equipped. Whole regiments were taken prisoner without even having had a chance to resist. And no amount of heroism, it seemed, could make up for the incompetence of those in command.
In the trenches, revolutionary ideas had caught on fast. The professional army had been all but wiped out in the war's first year. Those that had replaced them were mostly peasants, forced to enlist. They listened with interest when Bolshevik soldiers spoke not just of peace, but of the just society that could follow a revolution. Land and bread for all. In the cities, there were food shortages, rations, inflation. Police reports spoke of growing discontent. To those suffering, rumors of Rasputin's corruption underlined the gulf between ruler and ruled. But Rasputin was a symptom, not a cause. A distinction Yusupov, in December 1916, simply failed to understand.
We had laced cakes with poison, cyanide. Enough in each to kill a man, and more in the wine I'd poured him. He was talking of plots, of jealous aristocrats who couldn't bear to think of some peasant at home in the royal palace. All the time, stuffing these cakes into his mouth. He was like a demon, the way it had no effect. So at last, I pulled out my revolver. He was looking at a cross on the table. He said,
It's nice, nice. How much did it cost?
And I said, Keep your eyes on the cross, Grigori, and say a prayer.
Yusupov had lanced the boil, but the diseased body of Tsarist Russia remained. The murder made no real difference. In February 1917, a spontaneous demonstration broke out, a strike against rationing led by women textile workers. From the front, Nicholas ordered force to break up the demonstration. But this time the soldiers refused to open fire. All at once, the fragile nature of autocracy lay exposed. The Tsar found himself with neither the support nor the means to impress his will. In a train carriage halfway back to Petrograd, he signed his abdication.
We have decided to renounce the throne of Russia, to unburden ourselves of the supreme power.
In the weeks and months that followed, Russia began to break down. The Duma, the parliament, set up a provisional government, promising to hold elections soon. But revolution could not be avoided. Workers' soviets or councils urged soldiers and workers to take power and property from factory owners and landlords. Across Russia, the rich found their estates pillaged. Months later, the Bolsheviks stormed the Winter Palace and took control from the provisional government, and those of the old order fled for their lives.
For my part, the Bolsheviks came for me. But when they heard I was the man that killed Rasputin, they slapped me on the back. They called me friend, played the balalaika, danced. Here in Paris, there are those that still won't talk to me. Rasputin's murder was the first shot of the revolution, they say. Better 1,000 Rasputins than the Bolsheviks. It's nonsense. I know it's nonsense, but the thought haunts me nonetheless.